let me introduce you to our first speaker. Cal Fussman is an author, writer, and journalist. He has interviewed hundreds of icons who have shaped the last 70 years of world history. Cal has personally sat down with people such as Sir Richard Branson, Jeff Bezos, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Clint Eastwood, George Clooney, Tom Hanks, Pele, Yao Ming, and Muhammad Ali. Cal has published interviews in 2 books, The Meaning of Life and The Austrian Chronicle. And he also won a James Beard Foundation Award for Best Person Essay in 2011. Cal, the virtual stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Nathan. I gotta say, I've been on this planet for a while, but I have never seen a year as crazy as this one. I have no idea where it's going. I don't think anyone does. But I can tell you one thing. If you ask the right questions, you have the potential to take yourself to an amazing place. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about questions. When you think of questions, I want you to see them in a completely new way tonight. When I'm done, I would like one of you, some of you, maybe all of you, to understand that changing your questions can change your life, just like they did for me the week after I turned 7 years old. So I want to take you back to a day in November 1963. I want you to imagine me as the smallest guy in his 2nd grade classroom. Looking up at the teacher, Miss Jaffe, and she leaves the room. When she comes back a minute later, she's like a different person. She's wearing the same clothes, but her face is blanched white, and she starts talking in a voice so clear and cautious that it's almost scary. And she tells us that President Kennedy, our president, has just been shot. Well, this is a huge shock for everybody. President Kennedy was a young, vibrant leader, and he was beloved, and we all raced home to turn on our televisions to see what had happened. Well, it turned out that the president had been shot as he was on a convertible going through Dallas, Texas, and after the assassination, the vice president, Lyndon B. Johnson, took the oath of office and became the new president. Well, that night, my parents realized that I had never really dealt with death before. And it was a terribly tragic time for all of America. And they were worried that I wasn't going to be able to sleep well. So they called me over to the kitchen table and they said, Cal, we just want you to know that as terrible as this day is, this has happened before in our country's history, and the country has a plan to deal with it. That's why the vice president, Lyndon B. Johnson, is now the president. And when you wake up tomorrow morning, you're going to have breakfast just like you did last Saturday. You're going to go out and play just like you did last Saturday. And things are slowly going to return to normal. Well, they went off to speak to my brother, and I sat down at the kitchen table, and to show you how young and naive I was, I thought that if you had a middle initial in your name, that meant you got to be president, because the only people I ever heard of who were presidents had middle initials: John F. Kennedy, Dwight D. Eisenhower, Harry S. Truman, and now Lyndon B. Johnson. So I'm thinking to myself, I wonder how Lyndon B. Johnson feels right now. Is he happy because he probably always knew he was going to be the president with that middle initial? Or is he sad because he's only the president because of the assassination? Then I wondered, maybe he's scared that they're going to try and kill him too. Well, I couldn't figure out what was going on in his mind. And so I picked up a pen and a piece of paper, and I just started writing. Dear President Johnson, how does it feel? Are you happy? Are you sad? Are you scared? I threw out a few other options. Then I wished him well, and I folded up this piece of paper. We had just learned to address an envelope in school. And so I wrote on this envelope, President Lyndon B. Johnson, the White House, and I tucked my letter inside. I knew where the stamps were, put one in the right-hand corner. We used to lick them, and put my address in the left-hand corner, stuffed the letter in my pocket, and the next day I went outside, didn't tell anybody about the letter, and dropped it in a mailbox. Well, as my parents told me, things slowly started to return to normal, and I forgot all about the letter till about 6 months later. At that time, my mom came running up the steps to our apartment with a letter in her right hand. It was from the White House, addressed to me, from the president. Well, this was a shock. And the amazing thing about this letter was it wasn't written to a 7-year-old. It was written with great respect and reverence. And I knew that when we hit the second sentence that started something like this. In answer to your query, and I had no idea what a query was, but I did know that the apartment was filling up with people who all wanted to touch this letter from the president. I did know that the principal at school was calling. He wanted me to bring the letter in. And what I realized in that time was that a single question could get you to the most powerful person on earth. And it shaped my life. I went on, as Nathan described, to interview the icons who've shaped the last 75 years of world history. And it was that question that set me off on a whole career path. But something very interesting happened to me when I was about the same age of Lyndon Johnson when he got my question. I asked a question to somebody who was about 19 years old. And that question changed my life. I'm going to get to that toward the end of my talk. But before then, I would like to just show you how you can change your questions and affect these changes in your own life. And you're very prepared because you've already been an expert at asking questions. Studies show that when you were 4 years old, you were asking your parents about 300 questions a day. Why? Driving your parents crazy. And that's every kid, because we all have childhood curiosity, and it makes us amazing question askers. But something happens to us the next year. We become 5, we go to school, and there we're told, raise your hand if you want to ask a question. You can't just blurt it out. That would be chaos. And so what happens is the teacher starts to ask us questions, and we don't get to blurt out our questions anymore. And as time passes, you find that you start asking less and less questions. Your childhood curiosity is still there, but it's almost as if we start to shovel dirt over it. By the time you reach 12 or 13 years old and you go to school, it's not too cool to ask questions. And you think twice before you ask a question that's going to embarrass you. As you get older and older, the questions get lesser and lesser. And then you get to a point where you get your first job and you don't understand what's going on. And it makes sense to ask a question. But you start to think, if I ask that question, people might think I don't know what I'm doing. And so you shovel dirt over that question, you don't ask it, and you try and figure things out by yourself. And what I'm getting at is over and over and over again, our childhood curiosity gets diminished with time. And the amazing thing for your generation is it was hit in a way that no generation in the history of mankind and womankind ever was. Because when you came along, you had something that the world had never seen before. You had all the answers. It was on the internet. All you had to do was go to Google and just type in a few words and you could get any answer you want. So you want to know the population of Sri Lanka, you just type in population Sri Lanka and boom, 26 million comes up. You know what the answer is. Now, this is great to have all these answers, but what's happened is we are starting to lose the way we ask questions. And when you're typing a couple of words into your phone or into the computer, you find your question asking very different from the way it used to be. And you can see this also even in television interviews, where the interviewers will start saying, tell me about, share with us. Those are not questions. Those are requests. And what's happening is because we are evolving in our language and the way we communicate, we are losing the way we have been accustomed to asking questions. And this can be a little startling. I was watching a Zoom conference of people between the ages of 19 and 24. There was a moderator, there were guests, and the moderator told the audience, you can ask questions at the end, just raise your hand in the chat. And I found that when people came to ask the questions, a lot of them didn't know how. They would start telling a story and about themselves and then stop with the idea that either the moderator or the guest was supposed to figure out what their question was. I had to actually jump in and say, okay, everybody, write out your question on a piece of paper, single sentence with a question mark on it. And then when you raise your hand, ask that question. And you'd be amazed how after time, the questions started to get sharper and sharper and hone in on what you really need to know. Now, what makes a great question? Well, the best questions make the person who's asked just as curious about the answers as you are. Maybe they want to know the answers even more than you do. So let's take, for example, the question, why is your friend, your best friend, your friend? Why is your best friend your best friend? When you hear that question, why is my best friend my best friend? your eyes may go off into the air on the right side because you're searching for what is the answer. You're curious. And that is the kind of question that can tell you about the person you're asking as well as their friend. And these are the kind of questions that will make people curious to reveal themselves. If you cannot ask a question like that, it's going to be harder to actually understand what they're like. And the same applies for you personally. If you can't ask yourself a question that's right down the center and hits a bullseye, then it's going to be very hard for you to come up with an answer that can take you where you need to go. I'll give you an example of 3 questions that a very wise old woman once told me. Who am I? Where am I going? Why? You listen to those 3 questions and think about them and look deep into yourself, and you will be able to find your North Star. If you can take simple questions like these and use them, you'll find yourself going to very deep places. If you can ask questions that people aren't expecting, you're going to get very different results. I mentioned before that when I was in my mid-50s, about the age of Lyndon B. Johnson, when he got the letter that I sent as a 7-year-old, when I was that age, I asked a question to a 19-year-old. And that question changed my life again. Let me give you the background. I was sitting at a breakfast table with a very famous interviewer. His name is Larry King. He was on the CNN network for many, many years. The entire world watched him interviewing all the major players in the world. And I'm sitting at breakfast with Larry. We had breakfast every day for about 10 years straight, when this young guy comes in. And he is in college and about to leave college because he was confused. He was the child of immigrants, and his mother and father, like many immigrant parents, wanted him to be a doctor. And all his life, he was told, you're going to be a doctor. You're going to be a doctor. When he was 6 years old, on an American holiday called Halloween, where you get dressed up in different costumes, he was sent out into the street looking like a surgeon because his parents wanted him to know, when you grow up, you are going to be a doctor. Well, when he got to college, he had a big stack of biology books in front of him, and he realized that he didn't want to read those books. He didn't want to be a doctor. And he got very confused because he didn't know where he was going in life. And so he started to think about the meaning of success. And he started to think about the most successful people in the world and wonder, well, Bill Gates is one of the most successful people. I wonder what he was doing when he was my age. Lady Gaga is one of the most successful people. What was she doing? And he decided to find out. So he went to the library, but he couldn't get the answers to his questions. He couldn't find it in the books. So he decided to write the book himself. And the idea of the book was to go out and interview the most successful people he could find, and then pass on the information about what made them a success to all the people in his generation. And there was only one problem, was that he didn't know how to ask questions. So what he did was he found out where Larry King had breakfast, and he came in one morning to ask Larry to teach him how to ask questions. Well, Larry asked him, "Why do you want to know?" And he said, "Well, I'm writing this book." And Larry said, "Well, you know what? Cal helped me write my book. Why don't you talk to Cal for a few minutes?" So we sat down, and I just started out with a question. And my question was, "Are heroes dead?" And he looked at me like I was a little crazy, and he said, "No." And I said, "Well, that's kind of surprising to me, because the people that I thought of as heroes, like Nelson Mandela or Muhammad Ali, they're either getting very old or they're dying, and I don't see heroes coming up after them." And he said, "Oh, there are a lot of heroes." And I said, "Well, who?" And he said, "Tim Ferriss." And I said, "Who?" He said, "Tim Ferriss." I said, "I'd never heard of him. How could he be a hero if I'd never heard of him? You got to know about a hero." And he said, "Oh, no, Tim Ferriss is a young guy, and he has a podcast that millions of people listen to." And I really had never even heard of podcasting. And I started to become very curious about Tim Ferriss and his podcast, and about all these young people that this young guy named Alex was describing to me. And we started to become friends, and I decided to help him learn to ask questions and to help him write his book. And I did. Over 5 years, we met like 3 times a week. And ultimately, he got his book together. It got published. It became a bestseller, not only in America, but around the world. #1, as far off as Japan. It's called The Third Door. Now, you could say, "Well, Cal, you mentored him. You changed his life." But something bigger happened. He changed my life. He told me all about how podcasting and the internet worked. He introduced me to this guy, Tim Ferriss. Tim Ferriss had me on his podcast, and now millions of people heard me. Of those people, many people started to call and ask if I would speak at their conferences and for their companies. And that completely changed my life. And so you see, a young person today has the capacity to change the life of an older person. Alex was 19, I was in my mid-50s, and the change keeps going on to this day, because somebody may be listening to the messaging I'm putting out now and reach out to me and set me off on another journey. And so I want to leave you with a message that allows you to head out into the world and know that by asking the right questions to the right people, you are going to be able to go to places you can't even imagine now. And we need that, because it may seem to you like the people who are older than you are in charge and understand where things are going. But I got to say, I'm looking around and things look mighty confusing to me. It's going to be on your generation to figure things out and move things forward for all of us. And I hope that you can use a little of what I've passed on today to ask the right questions, to take yourself forward on your own journey, and then you find yourself in places that you could have never imagined before. Thank you so much.